What is up, everybody? My name is Logan Sharon, and welcome to CTF Sharon Talks Football. We've got a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any more time before we get started. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos whenever I post. Now, with all out of the way, let's get started. So the first game of the week we had was Thursday Night Football, and it was the Minnesota Vikings at the Los Angeles Rams. Before we get into what made this game so crazy at the end, let's just get into the stats. Sam Darnold played himself a pretty clean game, 18 for 25, 240 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Rushing was led by Aaron Jones, who was okay. He had 19 carries for 58 yards, no touchdowns, was not productive. Receiving was led by Justin Jefferson. Nobody else was even close to him. 8 receptions for 115 yards, 0 touchdowns. Receiving touchdowns was by Josh Oliver and by Trent Sherfield Sr. Jordan Addison did not play himself the best of game. He just did not get the ball that much. And this is probably the most shocking stat of the whole game. The Vikings defense not having a single sack and only had 1 interception, who was highlighted by Byron Murphy Jr. Now looking at the Rams, Matthew Stafford had a fantastic game. 25 for 34, 295 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, only 1 pick. Rushing was led by Kyren Williams with 23 carries for 97 yards and no touchdowns, but he did have a good game. Receiving played a huge factor for the Rams in this game. Receiving was led by the returning Puka Nacua with 7 receptions, 106 yards, and 0 touchdowns. Cooper Kupp had 5 receptions for 51 yards and a touchdown. Demarcus Robinson had 2 receiving touchdowns, and Kyren Williams had a receiving touchdown. And the Rams defense only had a total of 3 sacks in the game. Now let's get to the elephant in the room. What made this game so crazy? Towards the end of the fourth quarter, the Vikings were only down 20-28, only needed 8 points to tie the game, and they were still in it, but they were backed up on their own end zone. The Vikings, on 2nd or 3rd down, went to throw the ball. Sam Darnold was in the end zone looking for a receiver. And then Byron Young comes up and sacks him, not the normal way, but grabs his face mask, basically turning his head the other way, right in front of the ref, and the ref did not call a damn thing. That whole night, I was watching videos of Vikings fans losing their minds when that happened. I feel for them. That's absolute bullshit. No doubt the Rams played a great game. I was saying that the whole time. The Rams were playing an excellent game. They played way better than what I thought they were going to play, and I owned to that. But that doesn't excuse the fact that the Rams got bailed out on the levels that the Kansas City Chiefs get bailed out. Like, that was ridiculous. But all of that aside, this was a great game for Thursday Night Football, and the Vikings get their 2nd loss in a row, so hopefully the Vikings pick it up the next week, and the Rams are making a comeback. They're looking pretty good. First Sunday game we've got here is the Green Bay Packers at the Jacksonville Jaguars, and this game was a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. If the Jaguars keep playing like this, they might win them some games down the road. Now looking at the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence actually played a pretty good game. 21 for 32, 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, only 1 pick. Rushing was led by Tank Bigsby, who continues to prove that he could be a starting back on a team. 18 carries for 78 yards. Trevor Lawrence with a rushing touchdown. Receiving was led by Brian Thomas Jr. with 3 receptions, 60 yards, and a touchdown. That is great to see. He's been improving every single week. Now, you will be seeing a trend for every Sunday game because it was National Tight Ends Day, so each tight end will have at least a touchdown or a lot of receiving yards, probably leading the team in receiving yards. Evan Ingram with 4 receptions, 36 yards, and a touchdown. Now, one more thing I wanted to highlight, Christian Kirk having 2 receptions for 59 yards, pretty good, but sadly was his last game of the season. He tore his ACL. He's out for the year. The defense was highlighted by a half a sack from 2 players, one by Trayvon Walker and the other by Josh Hines Allen, and only 1 interception being by Jermaine Jones. Now looking at the Packers here, Jordan Love was underwhelming, only 14 for 22, 196 yards and a pick, but he did end up getting hurt in this game, so Malik Willis took his place, and he was 4 for 5, 56 yards and a touchdown. He looked pretty good. Rushing was led by Josh Jacobs with 25 carries, 127 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He had a fantastic game. And receiving was led by Tucker Kraft, the tight end, 3 receptions for 78 yards and a touchdown. Romeo Doubs with 3 receptions for 72 yards. And then Jaden Reed with 2 receptions for 55 yards, who continues to be underwhelming. And the Packers defense was only highlighted by 1 sack being by Edgerrin Cooper and a pick only being by Xavier McKinney. So, yep, the very close game, a very high-scoring game, but the Packers came up close, and the Packers escaped with the win. Like, the Packers are a great team and all, but if they keep playing like this and playing down the competition, they might struggle in the playoffs down the road. Next game we've got is the Arizona Cardinals at the Miami Dolphins, and wow, this was a close game. Looking at the Dolphins here, Tua had a pretty decent game, 28 for 38, 234 yards and a touchdown. Rushing was led by Devon Achane with 10 carries for 97 yards. Raheem Mostert only having 9 carries for 19 yards, but he did have 2 touchdowns. And receiving was led by Tyreek Hill with 6 receptions and 72 yards. And Devon Achane had 6 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown. And then looking at the Dolphins defense, they did not do a damn thing, did not record a single sack or a single interception. Now looking at the Cardinals here, Kyler Murray had a fantastic game, 26 for 36, 307 yards and 2 touchdowns, not a single interception. Rushing was led by James Conner, who wasn't that great, but he had 20 carries for 53 yards and a touchdown. And then receiving was led by star tight end Trey McBride, 9 receptions, 124 yards, no score. Then Marvin Harrison had 6 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown. And then Michael Wilson had a receiving touchdown. And then looking at the Cardinals defense, again, they did not do much, but they did have 1 sack by Dante Stills. But again, just like the Dolphins defense, they did not make that much of an impact. And it wouldn't be right if we didn't highlight the Cardinals kicker, Chad Ryland, who kicked a total of 8 points, including the game winner at the end. So yes, the Dolphins did get Tua back, but they still ended up losing, and the Dolphins fall down to 2-5. Next game we've got is the New York Jets at the New England Patriots, and the Patriots finally got themselves a win. Looking at the Jets here, Aaron Rodgers was decent, only 17 for 28, 233 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rushing was led by Breece Hall with 16 carries for 80 yards, not a single score, but Braden Allen did have a touchdown. Receiving was led by Garrett Wilson with 5 receptions for 113 yards. He had a great game. And then Devontae Adams only having 4 receptions for 54 yards. Continues to not be a standout whatsoever. And then you have a receiving touchdown by Tyler Conklin, the tight end, and then Xavier Gibson. And then the Jets defense had a total of 2 sacks, 1.5 being by Quinnen Williams, but not a single interception. Now looking at the Patriots, Drake May did end up getting hurt early in the game, so Jacoby Brissett had to step in, and he was okay, 15 for 24, 132 yards. Rushing was led by Ramondre Stevenson, who had 2 touchdowns, but overall he was pretty bad, only 20 carries for 48 yards. But Drake May did have a rushing touchdown earlier in the game before he got hurt. And then looking at the Patriots receiving, who continues to be a snooze fest, not a single score, and not a single receiver going over 50 yards. And then the Patriots defense only having a total of 1 sack being by Christian Ellis. So the Patriots finally got themselves a win. They are now 2-6, and then the Jets fall down to 2-6. And maybe this is what happens when you're fired coaching week 5, guys. This was all your fault. Next, we've got probably the biggest upset of the season by far. The Cleveland Browns beat the Baltimore Ravens. Looking at the Ravens here, Lamar did have himself a good game, 23 for 38, 289 yards and 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry led rushing with 11 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown, continues to be the best running back in football right now. And receiving was led by Zay Flowers with 7 receptions and 115 yards, not a score. Isaiah Likely had 4 receptions for 47 yards. Mark Andrews had a receiving touchdown, and Nelson Aguilar had a receiving touchdown. And then the Ravens defense really did not do much, only having a total of 2 sacks on the whole day. Now looking at the Browns here, who got the start for the Browns, the one and only famous Jameis Winston, who played a great game, 27 for 41, 334 yards, 3 touchdowns, not a single turnover. Rushing was a little lousy, was led by Nick Chubb with only 16 carries for 52 yards. And then receiving was pretty consistent. Cedric Tillman leading the receiving with 7 receptions, 99 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Elijah Moore having 8 receptions for 85 yards. Jerry Jeudy had 5 receptions for 79 yards. And then David Njoku having 5 receptions for 61 yards and a touchdown. And then looking at the Browns defense, not having a single interception, but had a total of 3 sacks on the day. So, yep, the Browns pulled up the biggest upset so far this season, and it's a beautiful thing, man. Like, it's funny how Deshaun Watson gets hurt, and then they're somehow winning games now. That should be studied. I don't know what's all about that. Who knows? The next game we've got is the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely whooping the Cincinnati Bengals. This was the only upset I picked this week, and it fell right in my face. Looking at the Bengals, Joe Burrow did play a good game, 26 for 37, 230 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Rushing was absolutely non-existent for the Bengals, but Chase Brown did have a rushing touchdown. And then receiving was led by the tight end Mike Gesicki with 7 receptions, 73 yards. Jamar Chase having 9 receptions for 54 yards and a score. And then looking at the Bengals defense, they did not do a damn thing in this game. Now looking at the Eagles here, Jalen Hurts did play himself a decent game, 16 for 20, 236 yards and a touchdown. Rushing was led by Saquon Barkley with 22 carries, 108 yards. Not a single score, but he did play an excellent game. Jalen Hurts having 3 rushing touchdowns. And receiving was led by Devontae Smith with 6 receptions, 85 yards and a touchdown. A.J. Brown having 5 receptions for 84 yards and a touchdown. And then looking at the Eagles defense, they only had a total of 1 sack, but they did have an interception, and that was by C.J. Gardner-Johnson. So the results of this game could go either way. You could either say the Eagles proved all of us wrong and they are a legit team and one of the better teams in the NFL, or you could say the Bengals are just not as good as you thought they were, and it could go either way. Next game we've got is the Indianapolis Colts at the Houston Texans. This was a close game, but the Texans ended up pulling it at the end. Looking at Anthony Richardson here, not a great game, only 10 for 32, 175 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Speaking of Richardson, this is actually a live reaction here. The Colts are actually benching Anthony Richardson until further notice, and Joe Flacco will now be the starter. That is actually hilarious. Rushing was led by Jonathan Taylor with 20 carries, 105 yards, and a touchdown. He played a great game. And then receiving was led by Josh Downs with 4 receptions, 109 yards, and a touchdown. No one even came close. And then looking at the Colts defense, not much, but they did have a total of 2 sacks, one of them being by DeForest Buckner. It's great to hear his name again. I just actually got another live reaction. This one absolutely sucks because I have him in fantasy. But Stephon Diggs ended up tearing his ACL. That absolutely sucks. Now looking at the Texans here, that kind of ruined my mood. But C.J. Stroud had 25 for 37, 285 yards and a touchdown. He played a decent game. Rushing was led by Joe Mixon with 25 carries, 102 yards and a touchdown. He played a great game. And then receiving was led by Stephon Diggs with 5 receptions, 81 yards. And then Dalton Schultz had 4 receptions and 52 yards. And Tank Dell had a receiving touchdown. And then the Texans defense had a total of 4 sacks, 1 being by Will Anderson Jr. and 2 of them being by Danielle Hunter. They have been great this year. Now highlighting the kicker for the Texans, Fairbairn kicked a total of 11 points. Without him, the Texans do not win this game. So, yep, close game. The Texans ended up winning it. And 2 drastic changes to both teams in the process that were both live today. I'm not kidding you. Next game we've got is the Detroit Lions absolutely beating the living hell out of the Tennessee Titans. Looking at the Titans, Mason Rudolph was okay, only having 22 for 38, 266 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. Rushing was led by Tony Pollard with only 20 carries, 94 yards, not a single score, but Mason Rudolph did have a rushing touchdown. And then leading receiving was Calvin Ridley, who actually did have a great game, 10 receptions for 143 yards. And then Nick Westbrook clean with a touchdown. That was a hard name to pronounce. And then the Titans defense had a total of 4 sacks on the day, not a single turnover. So, yep, let's just get to the ass-beating team right here. Looking at the Lions, Jared Goff actually did not throw for that much. He only had 12 completions out of 15 attempts, 85 passing yards, but he did throw 3 touchdowns. He continues to be great. Rushing was led by Jahmyr Gibbs with 11 carries, 127 yards, and a touchdown. David Montgomery having 9 carries for 33 yards and a touchdown. And then receiving was led by the tight end Sam Laporta with only 6 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown. Raymond had a touchdown, Brock Wright had a touchdown, and Amon-Ra St. Brown had a touchdown. I'm looking at the bottom here. Allen Robinson's on this team. If it was 2019, this would be crazy. Then looking at the Lions defense here, they only had a total of 1 sack, but they did have a total of 2 interceptions. So, yep, the Lions came up with an absolute ass beating, and so far look like the best team in football still. Next game we've got is the Atlanta Falcons at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs made it close at the end, but for the most part, the Falcons did have almost the whole control of this game and went as exactly as I thought it would the whole game, except the end. Looking at the Bucs here, Baker Mayfield did not play his best game, only having 37 for 50, 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions. The rushing was absolutely lousy. The receiving was led by Cade Otton with 9 receptions, 81 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Rachaad White having a receiving touchdown as well. And then looking at the Bucs defense, they did not do too much, but they did have a total of 2 sacks, both of them being by C.J. Brewer. Now looking at the Falcons here, Kirk Cousins had a very clean game, 23 for 29, 276 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He was fantastic. Rushing was led by Bijan Robinson for 13 carries, 63 yards, but no score. And then receiving was led by the tight end Kyle Pitts with 4 receptions, 91 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Darnell Mooney having 4 receptions for 86 yards and a touchdown. And then Bijan Robinson having a receiving touchdown as well. And then looking at the Falcons defense here, not a single sack, but 2 picks, one being by A.J. Terrell Jr. and the other being by Jesse Bates. So with this win, the Falcons are now the top team in the NFC South at 5-3, and the Bucs are now second at 4-4, and then below them are the 2 Stooges at the bottom of the division. Speaking of Stooges, here's one of them, the New Orleans Saints getting absolutely embarrassed in LA, losing 26-8. Like, what is there to talk about? The Saints were absolutely horrible. Like, look at the QB. Spencer Rattler was awful. 12 for 24, 156 yards, and not a single score. He got benched. He was horrible. Jake Haener came in, only threw for 9 for 17 and 122. Not a single touchdown from any of these quarterbacks. Rushing was led by Alvin Kamara, who could have done more, but honestly, it's not his fault. 10 carries for 67 yards. If he would have had a decent line, he could have done a little more. And then receiving was led by Chris Olave, who did have a great game. 8 receptions for 107 yards, but not a single score. It's crazy how much of a standout he is because everyone else was absolutely puke other than Kamara. And then looking at the Saints defense here, they only had a total of 2.5 sacks, but the rest of the defense was absolutely putrid. They could not do a damn thing. Looking at the Chargers here, Justin Herbert had a pretty decent game, 20 for 32, 279 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He didn't have to do much, but hey, you're playing the Saints. You don't have to do much. Rushing was led by J.K. Dobbins for 17 carries, 57 yards, and a touchdown. Again, he didn't have to do much because the Saints defense really did it for him. And then receiving was led by Ladd McConkey with 6 receptions, 111 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then Joshua Palmer had 2 receptions for 72 yards. And then looking at the Chargers defense, they were absolutely great. They had a total of 5 sacks on the day. So, yep, the Chargers put up the win, and the Saints somehow managed to only get a safety and 2 field goals out of it. I just got to say, I am so embarrassed to be a Saints fan right now. Like, this is the worst our team has been in the last 5 years, and we're not doing a single thing to change it. Our coach needed to go last week. I don't know why the hell he is still here now, but I didn't think it was going to get any worse, but it ended up getting worse. And this should have been the game that Dennis Allen should have not been in, but he ended up being in. So hopefully this will be the game that will tell the office to get rid of him. Next game we've got is the Buffalo Bills absolutely destroying the Seattle Seahawks. For all those Seahawks fans that are trying to tell me I was wrong about picking the Bills this week, look who's wrong now. Looking at Geno Smith, he didn't have that bad of a game, but he could have been better. 21 for 29, 212 yards and a pick. Rushing was absolutely terrible. Nobody did a single thing. Kenneth Walker was awful. Geno Smith led rushing with 5 carries for 16 yards, for God's sakes. But Zach Charbonnet did have a rushing touchdown. That's crazy. And receiving was led by Jackson Smith-Njigba with 6 receptions and 69 yards. And looking at the Seahawks defense, they could not do a damn thing, but they did have an interception, and that was by Josh Jobe. Now looking at the Bills here, Josh Allen was absolutely great. 24 for 34, 283 yards, 2 touchdowns, only 1 pick. Rushing was led by James Cook, who was absolutely great. 17 for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ray Davis had 6 carries for 29 yards. He was decent. And receiving was led by Khalil Shakir with 9 receptions, 107 yards. Keon Coleman continues to improve every single week. 5 receptions and 70 yards. And a beautiful touchdown with one hand. That was great to see. Amari Cooper was not a non-factor in this game. Dalton Kincaid did have a receiving touchdown as well. I almost missed that. And then looking at the Bills defense, they shockingly didn't do that much stat-wise. They only had 1 sack and 1 pick, but they did hold the Seahawks to 10 points, so that's great on its own. So a very lousy loss for the Seahawks. They did not look great at all, but the Bills did have a very convincing win as well, and the Bills are now 6-2 and a big threat in the AFC West. Next game we've got is the Chicago Bears at the Washington Commanders. Before we get to the elephant in the room, let's just go over the stats real quick. Looking at the Bears here, Caleb Williams was pretty bad. 10 for 24, 131 yards, not a single touchdown. Rushing was led by DeAndre Swift, who was absolutely great. 18 carries for 129 yards and a touchdown. Rashawn Johnson had a rushing touchdown as well. And then receiving was absolutely lousy for the Bears. Leading receiver was Rome Odunze with 3 receptions and 41 yards, not a single score from any receiver in this game. And then looking at the Bears defense, they did not do much at all, and they only had a total of 2 sacks on the day. Now looking at the Commanders here, Jayden Daniels did play a good game, 21 for 38, 326 yards and a touchdown. Rushing was a pretty big factor for the Commanders in this game. Rushing was led by Brian Robinson Jr. with 16 carries for 65 yards. And then behind that is Jayden Daniels with 8 carries for 52 yards. And then Austin Ekeler with 7 carries for 52 yards. Kind of crazy. Receiving was led by Terry McLaurin, who was great. 5 receptions for 125 yards. And then below that was Father Time Zach Ertz with 7 receptions and 77 yards. And then Nolan Brown having 3 receptions for 73 yards and a touchdown. Now looking at the Commanders' defense, they actually did not do that too much, only having a total of 2 sacks, but they did hold up the Bears to 15 points. That's pretty good. Now with all that out of the way, let's get to the elephant in the room. How did the Commanders win this game? The Commanders were down by a field goal, 15-12, with only 2 seconds left in the game. The Commanders did this to win the game. It is absolutely crazy. Check it out right here. Jayden Daniels absolutely throws a bomb to the end zone, a tip drill, and the receiver caught it. Absolutely outstanding. This is how the Commanders won the game right here. So, yep, crazy ending from the Commanders, and the Bears, better luck next time. Next game we've got is the Kansas City Chiefs at the Las Vegas Raiders. And, yep, the Chiefs won by a touchdown, and yippee, they are 7-0. Looking at the Raiders here, Gardner Minshew actually did not play that bad of a game this time, having 24 for 30, 209 yards, and 2 touchdowns, not a single turnover. That's kind of crazy. Looking at the rushing, it was absolutely horrible, with Alexander Mattison being the leading rusher with 14 carries and 15 yards. That is atrocious. And then receiving was led by the tight end Brock Bowers with 5 receptions for 58 yards, not a single score. Jacoby Myers did have a receiving touchdown, and DJ Turner had a receiving touchdown. And then looking at the Raiders defense, they did not do much, only having 1 sack and only 1 interception on the day. And then looking at the Chiefs here, Patrick Mahomes did have a decent game, 27 for 38, 262 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. I will say he has been underwhelming this regular season, but it's not going to matter because he's going to do well in the playoffs anyway, because that's how it's been the last 5 years. So we're just going to have to deal with it. Looking at rushing, was led by Kareem Hunt with 21 carries for 59 yards and a touchdown. He's been pretty decent from Isaiah Pacheco's absence here. And then receiving was led by Travis Kelce with 10 receptions, 90 yards, and a touchdown. He finally had a great game. Xavier Worthy, pretty underwhelming the last few weeks, but he did have a receiving touchdown as well. And then looking at the Chiefs defense, they had a total of 5 sacks. They were great in this game. So, yep, the Chiefs barely pulled through against the Raiders, but they do get the win, and they stick with their theme in the regular season with barely getting by in these games, but doing enough to win. But honestly, that's kind of a good strategy. Not being the greatest, but doing enough to win every single game, that can get you some places. Look at the Chiefs. Next game we've got is the Carolina Panthers at the Denver Broncos. And, yep, this went exactly how as I thought they would. The Broncos had complete control of this whole game. Looking at the Panthers here, the legendary Bryce Young threw for 24 for 37, 224 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Those 2 picks were a fluke, trust me. Rushing was pretty lousy. It was led by Chuba Hubbard with 15 carries for 56 yards. Other than that, they didn't do a damn thing. And receiving was led by Jalen Coker with 4 receptions for 78 yards and a touchdown. I've never heard of him before. And then Xavier Legette had a receiving touchdown as well. And another live reaction here, Deontay Johnson, who was basically the biggest receiver on the Panthers, just got traded to the Baltimore Ravens. So not the best team for him in my opinion, but he's free. And then the Panthers defense really didn't do much, but they did have 2 sacks, both being by Alshon Robinson. Not a single pick, but that Alshon Robinson did make a bit of an impact in this one. Looking at the Broncos here, Bo Nix wasn't too bad. He had 28 for 37, 284 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Not a single turnover. This is probably the best game stat-wise he's had all season. Rushing was absolutely terrible, but Bo Nix did have a rushing touchdown. And receiving was led by Courtland Sutton. Thank God, I thought he died this season. 8 receptions for 100 yards, not a single score. But the tight end, Adam Troutman, had 4 receptions for 85 yards and a touchdown. Jalen McLaughlin had a receiving touchdown, and Nate Atkins had a receiving touchdown. And then looking at the Broncos defense, they had a total of 2 sacks and then 2 picks, one of them being by the amazing Patrick Surtain II. So, the Broncos get a very convincing win against the amazing and legendary Bryce Young. And the Broncos are shockingly 5-3. That is not a sight I would see this year. Wow. Next game we've got is Sunday Night Football, where the Niners beat the Cowboys 30-24. And this is another I told you so moment. People were calling me crazy for saying the Niners were going to put up 30 or more points. And look what they did. They put up 30 points. I told you so. Looking at the Cowboys here, Dak Prescott continues to struggle against the Niners defense, having 25 for 38, 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 2 picks. Rushing was absolutely terrible. Zeke did have a rushing touchdown, though. And receiving was lousy, other than CeeDee Lamb absolutely lighting it up at the end. 13 receptions for 146 yards and 2 touchdowns. If it wasn't for him, this game would have been a blowout. And then looking at the Cowboys defense, they only had a total of 1 sack, being by Overshown. Other than that, the Cowboys defense was terrible. Looking at the Niners, Brock Purdy had 18 for 26, 260 yards and a touchdown. Not too bad. Rushing was led by Isaac Guerrero with 14 carries, 85 yards and a touchdown. Brock Purdy had a rushing touchdown. And receiving was led by the founder of National Tight Ends Day, George Kittle. 6 receptions, 128 yards and a touchdown. Deebo Samuel having 4 receptions and 71 yards. I didn't think he was going to play today, but he did, and he was great. And looking at the Niners defense here, they had a total of 2 sacks, one of them being by Nick Bosa, and also had a total of 2 interceptions. So despite the Niners struggling this year, looking at who they played this week, they figured they might have to pull their heads out of their ass in this one, even though they almost choked it. And the Niners got a win here, and they are now 4-4. And now the Cowboys are 3-4. And Jerry Jones thinks it is absolutely okay and nothing's wrong with it. Finally, the final game of the week, Monday Night Football. We've got the New York Giants at the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers came up with the win. This game was 2 points from each team away from being absolutely correct in my predictions, so that's kind of crazy. Looking at the Giants, Daniel Jones wasn't great. He had 24 for 38, 264 yards, not a single touchdown to pick. I mean, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't the best either. Rushing was led by Tyrone Tracy Jr. with 20 carries for 145 yards and a touchdown. He was fantastic. And receiving was led by Darius Slayton with 4 receptions, 108 yards, and Malik Neighbors having 7 receptions for 71 yards. Not a single score from any receiver in this game from the Giants. And then looking at the Giants defense here, the Giants defense had a total of 4 sacks. So they did their part, but they just could not end the game the way they wanted to. Now looking at the Steelers here, Father Time Russ actually had another great game, 20 for 28, 278 yards and a touchdown. Rushing was led by Najee Harris, who continues to be great this season. 19 carries for 114 yards, not a single touchdown, but his rushing yards was great. And the receiving was led by George Pickens with 4 receptions, 74 yards, not a single score from him, but Calvin Austin had a touchdown. And looking at the Steelers defense, they were great. They had a pick by Beanie Bishop Jr., and they had a total of 4 sacks, 2 of them being by, you guessed who, TJ Watt, and the other 2 being by Alex Highsmith. So the Steelers come up with a win, and the Steelers come up to being 6-2. I can't wait to see the Steelers play the Ravens. That's either going to be a really great game, or one of these teams here will get exposed. Either the Steelers or the Ravens will get exposed. And then the Giants do fall down to 2-6, but they actually did look not that bad this game, so I'll cut them a little bit of slack from now. And that was my reactions to every NFL game this week. This week was actually pretty hectic for the NFL. There was a lot of upsets and there were a lot of crazy plays in this week. And making this video was a lot of fun because I got to see like 3 different new stuff come up on my phone making it. So I got to like put it on the video. So I think that was pretty cool. Now before I go, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos whenever I go, and comment what you thought about this week, and comment if you are still mad at me for proving you guys wrong this week with my picks. And with all that said, I am Logan Sharon. I'll see you next time.